video about losing control. Recently I had a recording gig that I couldn't miss and it couldn't be rescheduled, and so my life became structured around it. Don't get sick, don't overwork yourself, don't do anything that could potentially ruin your chances of making it to this gig. So I relapsed, not with substances or alcohol, but with OCD. In 1877, the psychiatrist Carl Westphal published an article about what he called Zwangsvorstellungen. Obsessions are those which, in the case of an otherwise intact intelligence and without being caused by an emotional or affective state, come to the forefront of consciousness against the will of the person concerned, cannot be dispelled, hinder, and thwart the normal course of ideas, which the person affected always recognizes as abnormal, alien to him, and which he confronts with this healthy consciousness. This laid the groundwork for the medical definition of Zwangsstörung, in English obsessive-compulsive disorder, though it wasn't the first time symptoms of OCD had been described throughout history. I didn't know I struggled with OCD for the first few years. I didn't obsessively clean like many of the characters I saw on TV. Instead, I was often convinced that I was infected with parasites. I couldn't tell if I was hearing voices or not, and I was afraid to even brush shoulders with people because I was terrified that I would lose control over my body and do something horrible. I had to stop driving because every crack, every bump in the road left me convinced that I had hit something or someone, and I would drive around in circles, desperately hoping that things were okay. But even if nothing happened, things never felt okay, and treatment required accepting uncertainty, doing cognitive behavioral therapy, and understanding that you can't control everything, and then repeatedly exposing myself to my worst fears to show my brain that there was nothing to worry about. I understand it much better now than I once did, and over the years I've taken steps towards living a healthier life. But while getting ready for this gig, I let myself relapse. I felt the intrusive thoughts trying to take hold, and I just let them. And I thought that if I paused treatment for a bit, I could just pick up where I left off, but that wasn't true. After I was done, I found myself back at a far worse place than I'd been in years, and I'm still clawing my way out. After almost 7 years of long distance, my husband John is finally moving to Berlin to join me. I've always said his apartment is like an antique store, but that doesn't quite cover it. It's filled with props and pieces of shows he's done set designs for, and antiques he's collected throughout his life, but it's also like an extension of himself. When we were first dating, and I asked him why there were wings on the clock, and he said he put them there because time flies, it became clear to me that his apartment wasn't just a collection of old things. It was a carefully curated work of art that reflected his lust for life. And now it's mostly empty. I've been living in Berlin for almost 6 years now, and after years of planning, John is finally retired and coming to join me. So I flew to the US to help him finish packing and close out 63 years of living in the States. I flew into Boston so I could meet John at Brimfield, a town in western Massachusetts that hosts huge flea markets multiple times per year. John was there with our friends Chris and Kyle to sell everything he owned.
Table on a table.
It's a table on a table with a table underneath it. It's the John McDermott way. Everything must happen.
And this is like how many decades of stuff?
6.
Oh yeah.
Because I had my baseball glove from when I was like 5. So
Oh yeah.
almost 6 decades.
Yeah. Are you excited to like get rid of things, or is it complicated, or?
It's been a complicated year and a half.
Yeah.
From the very first box that I packed in January of 2023 till today.
Yeah.
I packed 300 boxes.
Yeah.
Maybe 400.
Yeah.
With
Oh my
everything
gosh.
I've ever imagined. Priced it, washed it, tied it, researched it, put it in a box. And now it's all done and it feels great.
I'm so glad I could be there to help John. It's not just moving. It's ending an era that's been basically his entire life so far and accompanying him to the next one. But while I was helping, I was acutely aware of how poorly I was doing. My brain was rattling with intrusive thoughts, and I felt like internally I was dancing during an earthquake, trying to find my footing on top of a shaky foundation, a rumbling of insecurity that shook me to my core. But I'm learning to let go, accept the uncertainty of life, and accept that I can't control everything. And in a way, John is learning that too. To let go of possessions, to fully uproot his life from all that's familiar to him in order to get to his future with me. Shortly before I left for the US, I had that gig, and honestly, I was surprised by how transphobic it was, and by the end of it, I asked them to take my name off the project. In that moment, I wished for nothing more than to just not be transgender. And that feeling brought up a lot of insecurity about who I am, who I've been, who I want to be, and who I'll never be. So when the taxi driver on the way home asked me if I was going to have kids, I didn't say I couldn't get pregnant, but that I wanted to focus on my career and moving to Berlin before starting a family.
Das ist das Beste, was es gibt. Unsere Frauen, vielleicht übertreibe ich, aber ich küsse ihre Füße, weil sie so heilig sind. Das ist so. Also es ist kein Kompliment, es ist nur so. Viele Männer wissen nichts davon. Was macht Männer? Nichts. Männer nur einfach dann tschüss.
Oh mein Gott. Ja, das ist sehr lieb. Ja, schön zu wissen. Ich wollte schon immer schwanger sein und eine Familie gründen, aber ich war ehrlich gesagt immer nervös deswegen.
Keine Angst, Marlene. Ich will sagen, einfach machen. Okay, du kannst mit deinem Mann reden, aber wenn du hast es im Kopf, sagst du einfach, ich mach ein Kind. Mach einfach. Einfach schmeißen ihn am Bett und einfach ein Kind machen.
Ja, dann mache ich. Vielen Dank nochmal. An die linke Seite, ja. Aber naja, danke nochmal für die Taxifahrt und ich hoffe, dass du einen schönen Abend hast.
Marlene, wir sind normalerweise in dieser Welt allein. Aber das musst du nicht sein. Mach ein Kind, gründe eine Familie und führe ein glückliches Leben mit deinem Mann. Wirklich. Vertrau mir.
Even if I wanted kids, I could have just said that we were thinking of adopting. Not that I wanted to get pregnant, which wasn't technically a lie. I mean, I do want to. I just can't. I think part of me feels shame because some of the most euphoric moments of me being trans are when I'm, well, not. But how can I have trans pride when my experience is rooted in people not knowing? Judy said I should be kinder to myself and that it seems like my discomfort isn't about being trans, but instead about how society views trans women. I don't ever really stop being trans. I just stop being treated like society often treats us. And in that taxi, in that moment, it was nice to be someone I'm not, to let go of who I am. If I still hold on, can I let go of things I never wanted to know, of things I never thought I'd see, and how the night sky catches me and shakes me out of bed. Then I start telling lies of things I've never said and things I'll never be, and how my life once seemed to me. Oh. There's a poison apple on the desk. There's a river if you want to drown. When your head catches fire that's fleeting, then shattered memories misleading, and cars that crash before you find out why they only went in circles on roads that show the opposite of death, through a forest that's gasping for breath. some hope in this hopelessness and listen to the silence ringing through all you ever do and all you've ever really known and how that sounds on Meadow Road. All you ever do just passes right on through. All you ever do you think you could even run away? Maybe does this fear mean that you should stay? Also, ich bin heute Abend in die USA angekommen und derzeit bin ich in einem Zug von Boston nach Worcester, wie du hören kannst. Ja, ich werde das auf Deutsch aufnehmen, da es wenige Chance, dass jemand nicht verstehen kann, wenn ich das auf Deutsch aufnehme. Ich fahre bis Worcester und dann mein Freund Kyle, ich werde mit ihm mitfahren zum Brimfield, wo ich John treffen werde. Ich freue mich so sehr drauf. Aber ja, ich hätte ein paar Gedanken oder was, die ich bemerken wollte. Und zwar, dass ich bin derzeit in die USA, um John mit dem Umzug und was zu helfen. Aber es gibt dieses Mal ein sehr interessantes Gefühl. Und zwar, dass wenn ich in Deutschland bin, ich fühle mich immer aus der Army, aber wenn ich die USA nochmal besuche, ich fühle mich als Deutscher oder was. Oder immer als Ausländer. Ja, überall. Ich habe viele Verbindungen mit US-Kultur und das Land und was. Offensichtlich ist mein Reisepass auch davon, aber ich habe mein ganzes Erwachsenenleben in Deutschland schon erlebt und ich glaube, alles, die ich sage, ist diese Erfahrung, eine Anwanderin zu sein. Und vielleicht mein Urgroßvater hat es auch gelebt, wenn er von Sizilien nach den USA von 100 Jahren oder was ausgewandert hat. Aber wir wollten das nur bemerken. Ich hoffe, dass ich kann irgendwann irgendwo zu Hause sein, aber derzeit finde ich mich in einer Stelle dazwischen.
Next station stop is West Natick. West Natick Station next. Please use the door to the front and to the rear of the train. That is where a staff member is located. Thank you.
Und dazwischen ist für mich ganz okay. Ich habe schon meine Transition offensichtlich durchgemacht oder überlebt. Also ich kann das noch überleben, zwischen irgendetwas zu sein. Und ich bin hier zu vorbereiten, alles mit John und die Umzug und vielleicht ist meine Lösung dafür, dass ich werde noch in Deutschland leben. Ich hoffe, dass ich immer noch ein Leben für mich da aufbauen kann und ich bringe John mit. So it's the night after I arrived and I just can't sleep. I'm sure jet lag played a role. I mean, usually I just pass out the second I get there, and then, I don't know, the next night, like tonight, I have trouble getting to sleep. But that's also just been kind of my norm recently, even before I came to the States. Usually I just try to sit in the darkness and try to accept it. But I learn a lot about myself when I'm with John. I think that's just the nature of relationships. When you're so intimately involved with someone, things just come up. Good things, bad things, everything really. It all just comes up as you share yourself wholly with someone else and they share themselves with you. And ultimately, I'm here to help him, to take that a step further. So I think I'm just gonna make a cup of coffee and start my day.
I think one of the reasons why I feel so emotional today is because I think you've been kind of my sort of tether to the U.S. even as I've left the US and have lived in Germany, it's always been kind of like, I have a room in New York, I have someone I love there, and it's always felt kind of like a double life. But I think with you leaving New York now to be with me, I feel like that's also like the end of, it's kind of feels like for real, like me cutting my ties with the US. Like my family still lives here, but I won't in like any capacity. Like when we go back, we'll be fully visitors. Yeah. Wow.
I'm on their 50th anniversary.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
At the place where they had their wedding in Boston.
Aww.
Capri Plaza.
Bill and Ginny.
So that was 50 years after their wedding.
Oh, I love that.
Them at that same place 50 years before.
Oh my God. What do you think your parents would say about us? I mean, I met your mom, but it was after, it was towards the end of her life.
They'd be
And
very happy that we're together.
yeah.
Because they always said, we just want you to be happy, and I just never knew what that was.
Yeah.
And, they couldn't define it, and that's really what I wanted.
When John was 8, his family moved from Natick, Massachusetts to Barrington, Rhode Island, an experience that would have a pretty huge impact on his childhood. It was one of the first things I learned about his past through an email he sent me shortly after we began dating.
Hi, Jake. It was so nice talking to you as we were both on the road today. Our first phone call. This is moving day for me, the anniversary of when I moved from an idyllic childhood home to a messy, stratified town at the top of a horrible decade. I was 8. Talking to you made it better. Here's a play I like and a photo of a play I designed. John.
That move was traumatic for John, and because of it, moving has always been a difficult thing. He's done it a few times since then, but it's almost always been accompanied by a need to run away. In his 20s, he abandoned his life without telling anyone where he was going, and ended up hitchhiking, sleeping in a car under a bridge, and working at various stores and restaurants as he tried to find some meaning and stability.
And you were doing like line cook work and stuff like that, and working in various stores and odd jobs, but you didn't really discover your passion for like set design until you were in your 30s.
Right.
I feel like when we first started dating, you seem like you're very well put together. Like you're so confident and you're so happy and you're so like just feel secure in your life. And so to learn that you really like went through a lot to get to this point.
Oh, yeah, but even in my 20s, I thought I was like doing well and I was secure.
Oh, really?
Yeah, pretty good.
Even when you were sleeping like under a bridge?
Yeah, I thought, for the most part, like this is working out pretty well.
Yeah.
So I think it's just being optimistic and realizing that you can kind of get through anything, I realized that in my teens, like, oh yeah, and then I remember when I was probably like 21, I read that line that Tennessee Williams wrote, endurance is all. And it's like, oh yeah, that's the ticket.
I feel like I was raised with like this aspiration to a strictly linear trajectory in my life where
unless we live in a house of chaos, which sometimes it's a little of both.
Whenever I felt like I was taking a step back, I got really scared because it felt like it didn't make much sense. But I guess to see you and to hear your stories and stuff really just like showed me that like it's okay to like not be okay.
Yes.
And even like now, like when I rant to you and your response is usually like, when I was 29, like I did not, like you're fine. Like it's really fine.
Yeah, I was getting up at 3 a.m. to cook breakfast for a bunch of people at that age.
I think your perseverance is very inspiring.
Thanks.
And you have
I
this.
was running a used bookstore at that point.
Oh yeah, the bookstore, which famously was called Books.
Yeah, that's right. It didn't last too long.
Cleaning out the apartment wasn't just about deciding which things he wanted to take with him. It was also about which things he wanted to let go of. Things he's collected, old letters, belongings from exes he was surprised he still had. He looked at everything and decided what it meant to him. He revisited his memories and then said goodbye or took it with him.
I've got to get through this part, I've got to get through this part, I've got to get and it all like worked out okay. The flea market was really the big thing, and I talked to her like a week before and not since, so she really didn't know what had happened. It went really well. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, just the effort of it. Emotionally, yes, too, because every single thing I had to look at and touch and connect with and decide, and you gotta live or die, like Berlin or sell. So that was hard, but that was over a whole year and a half. So I felt like I worked through that, and it got easier to some extent. But it's still, every single thing had to be done, and I wrapped everything and priced everything and researched it if I didn't know about it, and so all that work, it took 4 guys 8 hours to move everything downstairs.
He spent a year and a half sorting through basically everything he's ever owned, and when we got back to New York after Brimfield, 90% of everything was gone, but the apartment was still filled with memories, pieces of art, antiques, and models from shows he did.
Oh, we're making progress.
We are.
All of John's designs from how many years?
30.
30.
Yes.
Oh my God. So what's this?
This is the model for The Revisionist by Jesse Eisenberg that was at the Cherry Lane Theater. Produced by Rattlestick Theater, though. And directed by Kip Fagan.
Oh my God, this is so beautiful.
And Jesse Eisenberg and Vanessa Redgrave were in it. It was just a 2-character play for the most part, and then another actor showed up, Dan Oreskes, who's a great New York actor too. And the only thing missing from this model is the table, so I will make a table for this and send it to Jesse.
Oh yeah.
I don't know, it got taken somewhere. The funny thing about this show too is it's set in Poland, and we had the hardest time finding the right chairs. And finally he said, I have some at home, I can bring them in. And as I was throwing them in the car, I flipped them upside down, and underneath it said "Made in Poland" on the chairs, and they were the perfect chairs. So it's kind of fate.
Though he was leaving so much behind, John didn't want to go lightly. He didn't want to just carelessly throw away the things that he carefully collected and curated over the past few decades. He sold a lot of things at Brimfield, but on the last day, he just started giving everything away. If he couldn't take it with him, he wanted to make sure each object, each memory, went to someone who would truly care about it. And when we got back to Manhattan, John invited basically anyone he knew to stop by and forage through what was left. And what followed was basically a parade of people from his past.
How do you know John?
John was my scenic design professor at Adelphi from 2018 to 2022.
I met John at Scavengers, like so many people.
So I know John because he designed a beautiful production of Red Velvet by Lolita Chakrabarty, which I directed at Shakespeare & Company in 2015.
I met John because I used to walk past Scavengers with my dog every day. He's a dog person, right? And my dog loved him. And, how do you not love the person who loves your dog? And then Marcelo came into my life, and that's how he knows John.
I know John from college. He was my mentor and professor at Adelphi University.
And what did you take from John? Or what did he give you?
This is paper vine that I made for a props assignment my freshman year based on his scenic design work for Kate Hamill's Sensibility, in which it's all made out of just paper and glue. And I had no idea that John still had my vine, which is really exciting.
I used it as an example to show my next prop.
Wow!
Yes, so it was so nicely done.
I still have the note from that assignment, like the feedback note.
Yeah.
It is the kindest and most specific feedback I think I ever received in my entire life.
I'm taking some storage bags because I am also getting rid of things.
What are you taking? Can
I
you show
am
it?
taking John's set model from Frankie and Johnny at the Claire de Lune, which Marcelo and I went and saw in the round. Is that the precise?
I think it was a proscenium style theater.
It was a proscenium.
It was not in the round.
It was not in the round. It was a proscenium. Yes, in the Berkshires.
Oh yeah.
About 7 or 8 years ago. So that's why, and also it's a New York style apartment, which is of course where we live. So.
Based on this,
Based on John's apartment, so it makes me feel very close to have a little piece of John in our midst.
And what's your favorite memory with John?
It's not like one memory, it's just this memory of like being in the theater really late at night together. Me taking notes, writing, John working, us talking, that kind of like being in a just alone, with one other person working on a show late at night. Everybody else is gone and gone to bed, and there's something just kind of magical. It probably isn't like at the exact same time, but there's There was always baked goods involved in my memories of John, because he was always baking and bringing in, you know, beautiful things to share, and it was just so warm and generous.
I also just have to mention that you are the person who made the iconic nutcracker that has been John's profile picture on Facebook.
It's coming to Germany.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
That is one of the sweetest gifts.
Yeah. That was a fun gift to me.
And I also do think of John every time that I hear music playing in the CVS, because it is my favorite fact about John McDermott is his beef with public music.
Public music.
I think about it every time a song I don't like is playing.
Yes.
And I just go, I'm forced to hear this now for the next 3 to 4 minutes while I'm just looking for mouthwash.
I've never worked with a designer who's so patient and generous and willing to, you know, just kind of stay with the artist's meandering journey to the idea. I've said I don't think that paint color works, and John has valiantly stayed overnight to paint. Is that a new color or the floor? This is a scenic model of a show we did together called Zurich that Corkwood produced in 2018 at New York Theater Workshop. And we had a lot of conversations about whether there should be glass in this hotel room, which it was actually like 5 different hotel rooms. And we eventually landed on yes. And, you know, it was a classic example of, okay, this is gonna be a big expense, but I have this impulse that we should do it. And he trusted me, and we made this really special show that people, every review and every audience member commented on how special and impactful the design was, the scenic design. And it looks like a kind of simple hotel room, but it actually like holds quite a bit.
Moving on comes with the implication that you have to let go. And it's that in-between state that's always made me afraid of change. To try something new, you have to stop what you're doing and move somewhere else. You have to leave where you are. And there's something exhilarating but nerve-wracking about trying new things, moving to a new country, and finding new ways to live. But I'm fine with that. I mean, I have to be. If I stayed in one place for too long, I worry I'd forget the difference between ease and unease, the difference between the life I'm living and the one I want to live. In many ways, my transition has been an intense version of that. It wasn't just moving to a new place, it was completely tearing apart and then piecing back together my relationship to my body, my marriage, and society. But with this move, not only have I changed my life, found a home, and built a new one in a different place, but I'm taking someone else with me. And because of that, John is also going through these motions, these insecurities, and these endings. But it's all with the understanding that we're getting to a new place. And if I've learned anything in the last 7 years, it's just that things make more sense when I'm near him. So that is my center, and I have to find a way to structure life around it. Before I met John, I didn't really know how an apartment could be a work of art. It's not just a place where someone lives, but where they have lived. And John's mark was all over the place. But despite that, he made room for me. When I moved in, he constructed a work area with my things. If this apartment was an extension of his heart, that was proof of my place in it. But what's always impressed me about John is his ability to transform a space. When I moved into a new apartment a few years ago, he turned it into a home, building bookshelves, painting a wall, and designing it in a way that made the small one-room apartment feel cozy enough for 2 people. And because of that, even when he wasn't there, I still felt his presence. And this attention to detail is why his set designs have inspired me so much. Watching a model turn into a real immersive space that feels truly lived in has affected the way I write songs. How can I use lyrics, a limited amount of words, to create a believable story, an environment where life happens? I still don't really know, but each time I write a song, I try. And that's because I've seen John do it time and time again. But probably the thing that's touched me most about John is his ability to create something for nothing. Even though he's been through a lot and things aren't always joyous, he seems to have this unshakable urge to leave a mark on the world, both in his art and in his personal life. And probably nothing represents that better than his recipe for shortbread.
Hey, I'm gonna make some shortbread. So, I let the butter sit out today, and it being a pretty warm day, it got very soft. So it should be room temperature, but this is probably a little more melty than room temperature, but that's okay. I use my favorite rubber spatula to get the butter off the wrapper. So I'm using unsalted butter. I don't know why I was taught to use unsalted butter in baking. But salted would probably work just as fine. 2 pounds of butter in there.
2 pounds
so
of
that's
butter.
8 sticks.
Okay.
Now you can do it in just 2 sticks at a time if you have a small pan, but I have a large pan. So I generally make it with 2 pounds of butter. And then for every pound of butter, because you can increase it or double it, for every pound of butter, you're gonna put a cup of sugar. So we're gonna add 2 cups of sugar to this because it's 2 pounds of butter. So 2 cups of sugar helps the medicine go down. And since I'm moving out of this apartment forever in 3 days, I don't have enough sugar. So it's gonna be a little less sweet than usual, but I think that will be all right. I'm just gonna try this with 1.5 cups of sugar instead of 2 cups of sugar. So you put that in, and then you cream it. So you wanna mix it really well till it's all smooth and creamy and all the sugar's mixed in. About halfway in, I add 2 tablespoons of vanilla to this, and I'm going to do a little estimate. I'm being a little generous because I'm moving out and I can't drink it. You have your sugar and your butter all mixed up. You're going to add 1.5 cups of flour for every 2 sticks of butter, or 3 cups for every pound of butter. So in total, 6 cups of flour. Do a simple sift.
Oh yeah.
So I do, and I just use all-purpose flour. 2, 4, 6. Give it a little shake. And once it's all sifted, press those things through. And then you just fold in your butter and flour. And this is basically it. I mean, we did use unsalted butter, so one could add a touch of salt because it does actually help give it a little bit of a rise, and also brings out the sweetness a little bit. I mean, I'm gonna say just like a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And that's it. Just mix it, mix it, mix it. While you're mixing, I use Baker's unsweetened chocolate, but any unsweetened chocolate will do. I tend to like the unsweetened chocolate because it adds a nice tartness to the just barely sweet shortbread. So just put it here. I leave it right on my stove to melt while the oven's preheating.
That's a good idea.
325, that's what it's gonna preheat at. I love these pans. I found them on the street in New York City, like 59th Street, about 20 years ago.
That's the thing, is that John finds everything on the street.
There were stacks of them, must have been a restaurant closing.
Oh my god.
And I know they're very valuable. I mean, they're expensive. They're like $50 a sheet pan.
Yeah.
And then just spread it out in the pan very evenly. Kind of get a nice even spread. It's not completely flat, but it's okay. It'll even out a little bit in the oven. So I'm gonna pick this up, put it in the preheated oven at 325 for about 40 minutes, I'm gonna guess. It really depends on the thickness of it. If you have the recipe, it'd be much quicker. It'd be like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. But with 2 pounds of butter, it probably is gonna take 40 minutes to maybe 50 minutes. I don't know, it depends. The oven was really preheated. It's warm out today. I don't know how it'll do. We'll see.
So while it's cooking, I wanted to ask you, how did you... I know this story, but can you clarify the story behind the shortbread?
Yeah.
Like, when did you start making it?
Well, it was the day after I murdered my parents.
So what happened?
What happened? I always liked baking, and after me and my second long-term boyfriend broke up, I was not eating a lot, but I was really in the mood to make things and to bake, but I didn't want to bake anything too complicated. I didn't want to get lost in baking, but I wanted to make something that was good and simple and interesting. So I developed this recipe from lots of recipes for shortbread that I could really whip out in many different ratios, and it became very popular with a lot of my friends, and I brought it to a lot of theaters and stuff like that, and it really is kind of my comfort food that I love eating it, and people seem to really love it too. Chocolate is all melted, the bowl is hot, so be careful. I use my little rubber spatula for this. And I like to drizzle this on top, and I generally do a sort of diagonal drip
Oh my god.
It's the signature John McDermott diagonal drip.
Y'all, this smells so good.
So this is, as I said again, I think it's 2 ounces of unsweetened chocolate. I have sometimes at Christmas done this and then crushed peppermint stick candy on top, which is really yummy. And I've also done this dark chocolate and white chocolate, which looks really nice too. So yeah, you can do all kinds of variations. Some people don't put chocolate on at all. Some people put crystallized sea salt on top of the chocolate. One of my friends does rosemary inside the shortbread, which is really good.
Yeah, that also is delicious.
Yeah. And then, so I've used all the chocolate, and then I'm just gonna wash my knife. While it's still hot, you want to cut it. You don't want to wait till it cools, because then it crumbles. I just eyeball it. Usually cut it down the middle, cut it down the middle again, there, cut it down the middle of that one. And then I divide each of those into 3s, because I kind of like the shortbread fingers. So you get a long stick of shortbread. So you want to cut it when it's hot, and wait till it cools, and then you probably want to run your knife through it again, because as it cools it does kind of crisp up a bit, and the cut mark becomes a little less distinct. So I do all those finger size, and then once down the middle here, and then into 3rds. But this is for the big half sheet pan. You can also roll this into a roll and wrap it up in saran wrap and freeze it, and then slice it into cookies. My sister does that.
Oh yeah.
That's shortbread.
That's John's shortbread.
So John is in the shower, and I just wanted to explain a bit more about the shortbread story, because I think John, I don't know, he didn't really describe the exact part that I found so beautiful about it. And that is that when we first met, he told me that he had started making the shortbread because he was just like so devastated after this really harsh breakup he went through. And he fell into like a deep depression, and making the shortbread and giving it to other people was a sort of way for him to give back to the world and make others happy and just sort of create pleasure where it hadn't been before. And when I first heard that, I was just so astounded by that. It was very inspiring for me to hear. At the time, I was so, I was drowning in like alcohol and addiction and insecurities and anxiety. And I was always so focused on losing things and losing my life. But John had learned to sort of embrace giving and creating and putting something out into the world that hadn't been there before. And so I just thought this sort of gesture of making his own recipe and giving it to other people and sharing something that tastes good and also just makes people happy, that really, really touched me. I don't know, I've never met someone who lives so much with like intention, who appreciates life and appreciates all of like those complexities and all of the very complicated emotions that go into it, but also is focused on like honoring that and honoring those around him by giving them something they didn't have before. So anyway, that's a bit sappy, but I just found that really moving when I first learned that. And that is why his shortbread is always so special to me, because it's his love language. Like, it is how he puts his heart out into the world for others to see and eat and enjoy. The last few days in New York were hectic. A lot of running around, not through the city, but through the apartment, and up and down and back up the 5 flights of stairs to get to it. But after years of planning and complete packing fury, it was finally done. The apartment was empty, and we could finally exhale.
And this is what it looks like. Completely empty. Well, mostly empty compared to what it was before. And to those who are curious about the view, it's New York. Yeah, we're pretty much ready to go before tomorrow.
After watching John and the movers do 12 hours of physical labor to get the remaining things packed into the truck, I didn't really want to overwhelm him anymore by having to set up a shot and interview him one last time. But while we were lying in bed, while we were holding hands, soaking in the New York City heat with the fan blasting, I wanted to never forget this moment, so I hit record.
So how do you feel?
I'm physically exhausted, but I feel kind of empty in a way, and I'm ready to receive what's next. And that's about it, I guess.
It's so interesting because I feel like I've heard so much about you telling me about these stages in your life, like where you'd move on and like drop everything. But now we're laying in bed at the end of a day of dropping everything and we're waiting to move on.
Yeah.
I feel like we're in the middle of it.
But
That's interesting.
This is the first time I've done it with anybody else.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, so that's the nice part. You're such a pleasant person to travel with in life. Because usually I've been, somewhat doing it on my own.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on this journey with me.
Thanks for inviting me too.
Oh, of course. We've had so much fun together. Honestly, I didn't even, I feel like I haven't had to think about any of this. It seems like, oh, of course I meet John, and of course I'm going to ask him to marry me. And of course I'm going to move to Germany, and he's fine with it. And of course I am going to visit him all the time. We're going to have so many fun travels, and yeah, I'm grateful. Thank you for loving me and letting me love you so much. Well, I'm excited for Berlin.
Yeah.
Finally, with the both of us. I
fucking God.
I love Berlin so much, and I love you so much, and it's just I feel like it's the best of both worlds.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be so great. Mikiko asked me what I was gonna do. When I got there, I said, you know what I really been thinking of doing? Is spending half the day, maybe the mornings, learning German, and then half the day watching all of Sex and the City. I said, I just need something mindless that's entertaining and catchy. So that's my goal.
Well, I can't wait for you to indulge in my religion.
Yeah.
I love you, John.
I love you too. So yeah, ready or not, I have to catch up to you and Rebecca.
Oh my gosh. After John fell asleep, I went into the other room to blow out the candle he'd left burning, a gift from Vanessa Redgrave from opening night of that Jesse Eisenberg play he did. But with my OCD, well, the idea of flames is just debilitating. The idea that just a small spark can cause so much destruction, it's terrifying. So I was hesitant to blow it out. I was scared. But I did. It took a few tries, but I did. And when it was finally dark, I worried. I was tired and just wanted to sleep, but what if I didn't notice a little speck or something that flew onto the drafting paper? And if I go to sleep now, the paper and subsequently the whole apartment will be on fire, and we'll die before we even have a chance to start a new life together. So I waited, and I obsessively searched for solace, inspecting every detail of the candle and its surroundings. And a quick search became 5 minutes, then 10, then 20, until I remembered I wasn't thinking rationally. I'd never find the reassurance I so desperately craved. Life is uncertain, and wasting your time trying to take control of it feels like dying. So eventually I got in bed and went to sleep. I don't know if I missed something or if the apartment really was going to burn down. But I don't need to know everything. I've been scared basically as long as I can remember, and through the music I made, I can get a glimpse of how I used to deal with the fear, the anxiety.
When I was in college recording music under the name Gay Angel, I somehow thought it would be a good idea to write, record, and produce an 100-song album in a period of 10 months. This was peak substance abuse, gender dysphoria, and insecurity radiating from every pore of my body. I was not doing well. And I think the lyrics show that. This sort of arrogance I had that was born out of desperation, that led me to think that everything I said was poetic, regardless of whether or not it was. But despite the confusion and frustration, there were moments of peace, of reflection. And while going through old memories, I revisited the 100-song album, and specifically this song I wrote while scared to leave my college dorm room. And though when I look at old photos of myself, or I read things I wrote 10 years ago, I often feel such a disconnect from who I used to be, the words from this song still felt like mine. So I sang them again and pulled up a photo of John from when he was my age so I could sing them to him and record a theme song for this lost 20-something guy who was running around looking for meaning decades before we'd meet. And I felt like even though I'd never know that version of John, I could still tell him that he wasn't as alone as he thought he was, just like I was telling my past self the same thing by showing that words I had forgotten about still meant something a decade later. And since John inspired this new version, I retitled it after the street he grew up on in Natick. Different state, different storm, another day, another morn, 30 minutes out of bed, simple struggles the leaves never get. Sometimes it's better to think about the days I can relish, embellish, and blink my eyes, a new disguise. If I blink my eyes, the world goes away. But if I leave them closed, the solitude never to stay. So I'll keep them this way. So I'll keep them this way. Because no matter how much I sleep, the birds still sing, the river still rings, and there are still 4 seasons. Because no matter how much I sleep, the birds still sing, the river still rings, and there are still 4 seasons. Ooh. On my way back to Berlin, I found myself once again lying to a man about being able to get pregnant. While at JFK Airport, one of the disability accommodation people was making conversation and asking me questions about my life. And when I was telling me and John's story, he asked if we were going to have children now that we're living together. And I briefly thought about telling him that I'm trans, only to decide against it and give a similar spiel as I did to the taxi driver. Say that I've been wanting to start my career, but now that I'm approaching my 30s, I've been talking more with my husband about having children. All I could think about was how good it felt to pretend I was who I wanted to be. But that isn't who I am. If staying in the closet felt like being stuck in a war, and transition was the process of defecting to the other side, being post-transition, or whatever that means, is like coming home from war completely shell-shocked. I'm at a point in my transition where I generally pass, but I'm never convinced. I live my life as a woman, but I also don't really believe it. Whereas at one point, the hyperscrutiny I placed on myself might have helped me understand exactly what to focus on to present feminine to others, it's now a delusion. I might worry about my voice not being feminine enough when I'm sick, but men still call me miss and ask if I'm going to have children someday. And when I feel genuine anguish from delusions, worries that aren't tied to reality, well, that's not healthy. And a lot of my experience of being trans seems to be reaching for something that isn't possible, a version of me that will never exist. In his book, An Apartment on Uranus, Paul B. Preciado chronicles his transition in a different way than I do. When he travels with an old passport photo that doesn't look like his current self, he isn't a trans person who is outed, but a gender nomad, operating out of the confines of society. And through that, gender dissonance is not a burden, but a liberating force. I wasn't asking medical institutions for testosterone as hormone therapy to cure quote-unquote gender dysphoria. I wanted to function with testosterone, to experience the intensity of my desire through it, to multiply my faces by metamorphosing my subjectivity, creating a body that was a revolutionary machine. I undid the mask of femininity that society had plastered onto my face until my identity documents became ridiculous, obsolete. That feels more radical than anything I aspire to, and when thinking about how to truly liberate ourselves from the confines of gender, I'd rather argue for that than think that my goal is to have cishet men ask me about starting a family. But desire is only human, and though I don't want to ground my experience of being trans in things I'll never be, I also don't think I'll ever stop wanting things I can't have. But maybe that doesn't have to be a dead end. Maybe there are things that will never be in my control. But that's okay. I'm learning to let go. Shortly after arriving to Berlin, John and I had our biggest fight yet. Over the course of our entire relationship, we've only argued like 3 times, so this felt unique. A moment where there was just such intense tension between us. And for the first time in our relationship, I felt really challenged by our age gap. We both stormed away from each other, and as I was walking through Kreuzberg, I realized I couldn't leave him alone with no way to get home, in a city and country he didn't yet understand. So I turned around, found him, and sat down. I've been really struggling recently. As I've said, my OCD has taken hold again in a few different ways, and now that we're living together all the time, I'm remembering how those eccentricities can affect John. My overt caution, paranoia, and worry are things I have to take responsibility for, as it's easy for them to radiate outward and be projected onto others. And though I've made improvements over the last few years, allowing myself to recently slip back into it has become difficult. But there's also something darker underneath the surface. Something that happened to me that I've been avoiding properly dealing with for most of my life, and which seems like the root of my anxiety, fear, and insecurity. I've looked into dealing with it before, but it just seemed too daunting. And while I was also struggling with alcohol, substances, and gender dysphoria, while I was also going back and forth to visit John, I just couldn't. So instead, I just continued as I always had, trying to know as little about it as possible. Long distance hasn't been easy, but in a way, I'm sort of grateful for how things have turned out. While I was dating older men in college, I sometimes had tension with the men I was dating because they had already lived such vivid lives, and many were looking for calmness and familiarity, but I wasn't really interested in settling down. I wanted to love someone and feel loved, but I also wanted to travel, to take risks, to play music wherever I could, and chase this dream of living in Berlin that I couldn't stop thinking about. So when John said he would be fine with me moving to Germany, possibly forever, I proposed to him a week later. He understood where I was at and didn't want to pressure me in any way. He wanted me to explore just like he once did, and to not feel weighed down by our relationship. So when I moved to Berlin, I continued living out my 20s and did exactly what I wanted to do. There was an incredible amount of trust between us, and I was able to work through things on my own, go too far with substances, allow myself to feel pain, and just work out shit with gender dysphoria. All things that make sense for my 20s, but without projecting my instability onto John. And because of that, though we were at 2 different points in our lives, we eventually found a meeting point. After spending most of my 20s living apart, making mistakes, starting my career, and just figuring out who I am, there's no doubt in my mind that there's nothing I crave more than being around John. I'm grateful for the life I've had separate from him, but I don't want it anymore. I think if I had settled down without having that chance, I might have always wondered, what if? And as I'm finally finding more stability, being in one place without constantly going back and forth, I've started confronting the darkness. It's been ruining my sleep, keeping me from being able to relax. And as I'm living with John, it's having an effect on him, too. I want to make peace with it. I want to find hope in this hopelessness, so I've been trying to get professional help. But to do so takes patience, and it'll take some time. I've learned a lot about myself in my 20s. I mean, figuring out sobriety and gender dysphoria were things that had to be done eventually. But I also specifically wanted to understand them before John moved here, because I felt an urgent responsibility to tackle those glaring problems in my life before they became his, too. But I'm only 29. John has had longer to understand himself, to feel comfortable, to live through things, and to reach a point in his life where he wants to relax. But while he's joined me in Berlin to begin his retirement, I'm still in my 20s, figuring out who I am and what I'm doing with my life. I'm used to getting hate about our age gap, but I thought it was interesting when I recently posted a photo of us to the long-distance subreddit to celebrate finally living together, only to get a lot of hate comments focusing on our ages. I think if those people heard me talk about this complicated feeling of being 29 while my husband is 63, they would say it serves us right, and that's one of the pitfalls of an age gap relationship. But all relationships have unique dynamics. I mean, one of the reasons why I thought it was so weird and surreal to be criticized on the long-distance subreddit of all places was that you would think people in those relationships would understand how it feels to be two consenting adults in a relationship that others say won't last or is inherently unbalanced. I mean, why can't you just fall in love with someone in your neighborhood? And you can continually try again to find the exact type of relationship others expect you to have, or you can follow your heart and understand that life is so much more complicated than we often think it is. I think in any relationship there are responsibilities. Like, my OCD has a big effect on John, so I need to focus on treatment not only for myself, but for him and for us. But I think this process of healing trauma, what feels like piecing together my soul after it was shattered into millions of pieces long ago, well, it just feels different, and what I'm experiencing doesn't feel like my fault or the result of my actions or inaction. I didn't ask for it, but yet it feels like my responsibility. And it's affected me, and it's affected our relationship. And I think it's good I'm finally working through that, but it seems like it's going to get worse before it gets better. After I sat down next to John, we continued arguing about how to proceed. When presented with tension, we both have an impulse to flee, to run away. But this time we both chose not to. Instead, we sat with the discomfort. We said nothing, but our silence said so much, until we eventually started talking and slowly putting ourselves back together. Loving John has always felt so effortless to me. I've never had to think about it. We're at different stages in our lives, but that always felt like an inevitability, not an obstacle. But in this moment, I felt that weight fall on me as I realized I couldn't apologize for only being in my late 20s. But I think there's something beautiful about the type of relationship we have. To fall in love with someone a bit further along than you. I might struggle and the future might seem unclear, but then there's John. Someone who's been through so much, but is now on the other side, and tells me not only that things will be okay, but that they are now. And I think I'm finally starting to believe him. Nights like these feel like a placid mess. Oh my dear, I'm sorry, but there's a knot in my chest. I know again. Wine drips down the point from where my dress meets my heart and where the light wanders in. But now it's dark, I'm gone in love with our broken clocks still make a sound. Even fallen leaves will soon hit the ground. I wish I could forget how it seems, forget my dreams. Somewhere else I've never known. I don't think I've ever swam out this far. Oh, I can see that what I never was. Can't believe that what I'll never be is right in front of me, of me. Life in Berlin doesn't feel real. For the past 7 years, John was always just this person who I loved and was always in touch with. But my life here was its own thing, and a lot of our relationship was structured around that tension, the push and pull of being together and then being apart. So it feels surreal to finally have him here, for him to get a bank account, and to help him prepare visa stuff and start learning German. He's no longer a visitor to my life, it's now his life too. And after reaching what we had been dreaming about for so long, I wonder what we'll dream about next. Though I now understand myself better than I once did, I still often feel like a mess and like I don't have a grip on my life. But then I make a video or write a song and I think about how maybe that's not really the point. Maybe what matters more is that sometimes there are moments where you capture beauty, where you're able to say something that hasn't been said before. And everything that happens around that doesn't have to be perfect or in your control. Judy recently opened a solo exhibition at Pink Dot in Prenzlauer Berg. I've spoken before on this channel about how important her work is to me, so when she asked if I'd sing at the opening party and play the song I wrote named after her comic series Everything is Somewhat Repaired, I of course said yes. Her heart on display, so John and I stopped by, invited friends, and we all had a good time celebrating Judy and her art. And since it was me and John's 7-year anniversary, I sang an old song.
My name is Marlena. I record music under the name Avelo. And thank you, Judy, for having me. Congrats on some amazing Dubovoy. I'm gonna play 2 more songs. And then but they won't be that sad. But because the next song I'm going to play is one that I've actually never released and probably never, or maybe will release, but it's a happier song because my husband, John, he moved here last week. And we were in a long distance relationship for 7 fucking years. So that was pretty crazy. But also, and this next song was a gift for him in late 2021, which was when I was having trouble finding out how to give him gifts, because how do you give gifts to someone who's in a mere 2 years will be uprooting their entire life to come and be with you? So it's I don't really want to give something physical. So I gave an album. I made an album, and this was one of the songs off of it. I was also a man at this point in my life. Kind of upsetting. No offense. Is a man. But so I wrote this song that was a gift for John as a sort of I don't know, just sort of celebration of the relationship we had. Or we have, because I often felt very stressed out about time and mortality. My husband John, he's 34 years older than me, and that's always been my thing. But also, it's kind of freaky when you meet someone who you're so in love with, and you realize oh my God, they're at such a different stage in life than me.
And there's this sort of like crashing wave that comes down about like mortality and like what it means to like how you live your life in every moment and not really worry about the future. And I was really struggling with this when I wrote this song, and I thought, that's what this is about. But then I also started transitioning like 3 weeks later, and I'll explain more about that after this song. But it's kind of wild to like look at this song and it's like, girl was down bad. Like it was she was in danger. Maybe you'll see that too. It's called The Flower in Repose. Scared, my love, reach up, I'll be behind you. A flower in repose, some shortbread left to give, 6 words to learn that I